everyone, and welcome to another episode of the long and winding Royal Road here at postwrestling.com. It is, of course, our look back at the history of the 1990s era of All Japan Pro Wrestling, taking a look at some of the best matches in the history of that promotion, of that era, of the entirety of professional wrestling. And my name is W.H. Park, and I'm your host today. And joining me today is a special guest who many of you might be familiar with. He's appeared on Post Wrestling many, many times with John Pollock and Wei Ting. He is the host of the Wrestlenomics podcast. He is Brandon Thurston. Brandon, how are you today?
I'm great, WH. I'm excited to talk about possibly the greatest era of professional wrestling for a promotion, at least in my opinion. So
you're like me. You kind of like a big fan of this era of wrestling, and like I can't think of anything that has come before or after that matches the match quality of the really high end stuff of All Japan of this time.
Yeah, people say this recent era of New Japan comes pretty close. Maybe it does, but at least for me, growing up as a tape trader, like as a teenager, this was a big discovery. Like I got into tape trading in the very, very late 90s. I think I got a Hayabusa best of comp off of eBay in like 1999, and it had all of the Hayabusa death matches, because Hayabusa was he does high flying flips and he does death matches, so it seemed the best of both worlds as far as what was advertised to me on the internet on eBay. So I checked out a Hayabusa comp tape, but at the end of that Hayabusa comp tape was a few of his matches from the 97 tag league, which include a tag with Misawa Akiyama, which you have reviewed already. I think you did.
I did. Yes. Yeah. Where he's teaming with one Jinsei Sensaki, which who people might remember as Hakushi from the WWF. And I'm sure. What did you think when you first saw like Misawa and Akiyama?
I was blown away by the near falls, and actually, so I had like a 6-hour tape, but I think it was supposed to be an 8-hour tape, so it cut off at like right as the near falls were getting super hot, and I was getting super into it, and I was like, oh my god, this is the best match I've ever seen. And then the tape hit the end and then automatically rewound, which is what happens for those who are not familiar with VHS tapes and who missed out on that era. When you get to the very end of the tape, it will just immediately stop and immediately rewind. So I had to check out more All Japan from there, and and then I got into just more of the classic singles matches and more of the classic tag matches. And I do remember where I was when I watched this match on probably like 7th generation VHS. So yeah, it's All Japan Pro Wrestling in the 90s was a huge, huge deal to me. I have the program from the Misawa and Jumbo 1990 match, which you have also reviewed. I have the program, the real program. It's in a frame, and I have put it on my wall. Actually, since I moved, I don't think I've put it back up, but I will soon.
That's amazing. Like, did you get that from someone from Japan or from Totogan?
I think I got it from eBay as well. More recently, though, within the last 10 years or so.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So most people might be familiar with your work with Wrestlenomics Radio and appearing, to talk the business side of wrestling, especially of modern wrestling with John a lot. How did that come about? I just want to get people background on you as a podcaster first, Brandon.
Sure. So I've been a wrestler since 2003. Is when I started training, but I got really interested in the business of wrestling around the time that the network launched, just because I've always been interested in how new technologies and new forms of media change the wrestling business and really change people's lives in kind of underrated ways. And I think pro wrestling has been really affected by whether it was, I think you could go back as far as the railroad in the earliest times, but TV in the 50s and cable in the 80s, and eventually pay-per-view, and the internet and streaming video, I think have all had huge effects on the wrestling business. And so when the network was launching, I thought, oh, this is the next step. So I got really interested in it and followed a lot of the news coming out of the network launch and the subscriber counts. And of course, that when I was interested in that, I discovered the work of Chris Harrington, who I guess I had probably met before. We had mutual friends because he is from Rochester, New York originally, and I'm from Buffalo, New York, which is where I still live. And he grew up sort of in the independent wrestling scene in Rochester, and as I came up as an independent wrestler in Buffalo, eventually Rochester and Buffalo are only about an hour and a half away from each other in terms of a drive. And so I got to know a lot of Rochester wrestlers, and those, by the time I encountered Rochester independent wrestling people, Mookie had moved to Minnesota. Chris Harrington is Mookie. That's one and the same, people may know. So anyway, I ended up getting to know Chris better, and we ended up doing the Wrestlenomics podcast together from 2007 through 2018. I think those 2 entire years. And at the same time, I had started to write more about the business of wrestling, especially WWE, because there's a lot of information there because they're a publicly traded company. And so Chris and I did the podcast, and he went away. He got scouted and rated by AEW. So he works for AEW now as vice president of business strategy. And I'm continuing to do the Wrestlenomics podcast and do the Wrestlenomics website and things of that nature. So it's it's always a big day when something like the Peacock deal comes down, and everybody's calling me to appear on their podcast, including post wrestling. So that is always a fun and busy time.
Yes, I can imagine. But you kind of mentioned 2 things I want to touch on. One, Chris Harrington, who, by the way, I had lunch with in Tokyo a couple of years ago. Yeah, he came. Well, it was during the Wrestle Kingdom with Tanahashi versus Omega. Right. This would have been Omega's last match for New Japan, and it would have been the launch of All Elite Wrestling. The announcement was done right after the Wrestle Kingdom show, and then I remember, I think it was through John Pollock said, "Oh, someone named Chris Harrington wants to contact you about getting tickets." And I said, "Okay, sure." So I got him some tickets for an All Japan show on the 3rd.
Sounds familiar. I think I remember him telling me about that.
And then we went to a Stardom show same day, and we had ramen, and then we went to Ribera Steakhouse afterwards. So it was really fun time hanging out with Chris. Very, very nice man. And I can, if anyone ever has a chance to talk to him about records, he's a big vinyl collector, or Laserdisc as well. He's a big Laserdisc fan. Yes. And it was fun time talking with him. But that was point 1. The point 2 is I want to talk about, you briefly touched upon that you are a trained professional wrestler, independent wrestler. And I have seen some of your matches, especially your program with one Daniel Garcia. And I just want to say to everyone, if you want to see some really high-end, great technical wrestling, check out Brandon's matches with Daniel Garcia. You can find most of that program. I think he did a really interesting angle with him over a series of matches. You can find all of that on YouTube. Yeah,
that was very meaningful. So I had a hand in training Daniel when he started to wrestle only a few years ago. He's still in his early 20s. So if you could buy stock in wrestlers, I would recommend buying stock in Daniel Garcia. He just did a spot on NXT a month or 2 ago. So I think, especially when the pandemic is over, there's going to be some big things in store for him. But yeah, that stuff is on YouTube, and we, it was really sort of a student and teacher type story. There's a lot of promos and stuff that I think really get people invested. It also followed the time where Daniel and 3 other wrestlers, Kevin Bennett, Kevin Blackwood, and Puff, had been in a car accident, which was, very real. This is not an angle. They were in a car accident on their way home from a wrestling show in Montreal on their way back to Buffalo. So he had been hurt the worst, I think. He had 2 broken legs as a result. And so it took him several months to get back in the ring. But that was one of his first matches after recovering. So,
yeah, definitely a lot of that stuff is on the YouTube, as I was saying, and go check it out. Just type in Brand Thurston, Daniel Garcia. I'm sure all those all the matches will come up, and all the shows with the kind of the interviews and stuff that I thought were really compelling when I was watching them.
Yeah, but he does this great
promo
in the hospital, which is legit while he's in the hospital, sitting in a wheelchair, and
that's a true pro wrestler. That's you get. Oh, let's just do it in the hospital. Make it real as possible.
I think he had his mom hold his iPhone, and they start with a shot of go out the window at this hospital, ECMC, which is sort of this high rise hospital in Buffalo, and you can see the skyline, and then it pans over to him in the wheelchair, pissed off. And it's pretty good. But the other thing you mentioned about Mookie in Japan, whenever I have a Google alert for his name, so whenever his Chris Harrington's name appears in the Google News, I get an email alert, and usually it's because Dave Meltzer has mentioned on Wrestling Observer Radio the fateful meeting between Chris Harrington and the New Japan office at that time, and during that trip that you were visiting with him.
Yeah, I think he mentioned a bit about that to me, but like I'm probably not at liberty to really talk about it too. I probably don't remember that many of the details, to be honest with you. I do remember we had really good ramen for lunch. Jojo Remy took us to a nice ramen restaurant with Chris, and that was a fun time having lunch with both him and Chris. But let's get to today's true topic, Brandon. We're going to talk about a match that you picked, and please introduce this match to all the listeners.
So we're going to do the December 6th, 1996 World Tag League Final between the teams of Jun Akiyama and Mitsuharu Misawa against Akira Taue and Toshiaki Kawada. And I don't know if you talk about this much, but like there's a lot of because just All Japan in the 90s, the tours do have brand names like Summer
Excite Series, Super Excite Series,
and
things like that. Yeah.
Giant Series and so forth. But there's no like pay-per-view big names, even like how New Japan has today. So I have a lot of these dates burnt in my head. So 12/6/96 is definitely one of them. And I think this is considered, this and the 6/9/95 tag match, considered among the best tag matches of all time, or at least those of this era of All Japan. So this is following. You want me to just do the history? Because I think I can. This follows.
Yeah, sure.
There's a number of matches between these two teams earlier in the year. This is obviously the end of the year, but so Taue and Kawada have been a long time tag team at this point for a few years, and they've I think they have the tag titles going into May 23rd, 96, and this is where Akiyama and Misawa have just started to team up, because I think the Misawa and Kobashi tag team has sort of come to an end. And Kobashi's beginning his run with various partners, including the Patriot, which we see in this tournament, in the highlights anyway. And Akiyama and Misawa beat Taue and Kawada. Sort of, I feel like it's this, the overarching story to me of All Japan at this time is the story of Misawa and Kawada, and the sort of underdog or resentful relationship that it seems that they have, which we could probably talk a lot more about. But I think there's this story of Misawa has this new partner, and even with this new partner, they're still able to beat Kawada and Taue. And Akiyama pins Kawada, I think, is the finish in the 5/23/96 match. And Misawa and Akiyama take the titles. And there's another match between those two teams in July 9th, 96. And Misawa and Akiyama retain and beat them again. And then in this, I don't know if we're jumping too far ahead, but then in the tournament, they do have a league match, because everybody wrestles everybody in the league, with the two top teams going on to the final. But when these two teams met in the league, Misawa pinned Kawada. So lots of beating Kawada and Taue here.
Yeah, so basically the team of Misawa and Akiyama are like, they're 3-0 against Holy Demon Army, which is, of course, the team of Kawada and Taue here. And I do think you kind of really hit the nail on the head with the overarching theme of the promotion is the struggle between Misawa and Kawada. Like, Misawa is firmly established as the ace of the company. He's held the Triple Crown title. He's not the Triple Crown champion at this time. That's, I believe is Kobashi. So earlier in the year of 1996, like, Misawa loses the Triple Crown to Taue. Yep. So there's like that history between those two, as well as like between Misawa and Kawada. But then Taue has lost it to Kobashi since then. So him and Kawada, they're kind of like, claim to the company, like being top people in the company, are through the World Tag Team titles, which they have held, which they kind of have a stranglehold on at this time, up until the time that Misawa and Akiyama defeat them for the titles back in May 23rd. But I do think like there's also not just like the resentment of Kawada towards Misawa, but like you have this idea of like, Taue is continuing the work of Jumbo Tsuruta, like from Tsuruta Gun, because Jumbo has to retire because of his illnesses and his medical condition. And then basically Giant Baba decides, like, I need to replace Misawa's new rival with somebody, and it's going to be Kawada. So the easiest thing to do is basically take, Kawada out of the Super Generation Army and stick him in Tsuruta Gun, and then just change the name to the Holy Demon Army. And just a continuation of that kind of that rivalry that Misawa was having with Jumbo, but now it's with his former tag team partner and generational rival in Kawada. And so like, but you know, Taue, so who's someone we're going to talk about a lot of, I think, in this particular show, is just as important with his own dynamic with Misawa, because he's carrying on the legacy of feuding with him from his days in Sarutogan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I when people ask me who my favorite wrestler is, I think it's Kawada. Just I think the story of Kawada is so sort of deep and tragic, and sort of when I start explaining it, and I usually end up just saying, yeah, because that's how life is. Like he's always the second best. He comes up. You've talked about it at length in the most recent episode with the Kawada biography, but he comes up with Misawa through school on the same wrestling team, and he's like best friends with this guy apparently, and he always plays number two to him, despite you may even feel that, you know, sort of in terms of his performance, I think he's a more dynamic performer than Misawa is. Then you have like that Tom Zenk story where, you know, Tom Zenk talks about how Kawada, you know, recognized that, you know, Misawa was this handsome wrestler and maybe Kawada wasn't as good looking, and he always feels like he's second best. And even when he does get the big triumph, it's not always in the most satisfying way, I guess. Like the match where he finally beats Misawa for the Triple Crown in '98 in the Tokyo Dome. Yes, it's in the Tokyo Dome. It's sort of the most built up match, you could arguably say, for all Japan in that era up to that time. But it's not exactly the classic. That's, you know, it's not the 6-3 '94 match. It's not thought of as this awesome match. And even Kawada's title reigns, when he does have title reigns, are, you know, in '95, he has one defense that goes to an hour with Kobashi. Great match, but it's not a win. And then he loses it right away to Hansen in '95 in March. And then his second reign, he loses it right away to Kobashi in '98. And then his third reign, I think I'm getting these numbers right, you can tell me if I'm wrong, WH, and then his third reign comes when in the Ganzo Bomb match, in the broken arm match. He beats Misawa, but his arm is broken, and he's got to vacate the title right away.
Yeah, he has incredibly bad luck. I think the '99 match where he wins the title for the third time is like especially tragic. I do feel like he probably would have got a long run with that title. But everything else is like, I think, you know, he has to play second fiddle to, you know, not only Misawa, but it's obvious from, I'd say, from 1995 on that, like, you know, the person who's going to succeed Misawa as the ace of the company is going to be Kobashi, and not Kawada. Kawada is always going to be that foil to both Misawa and to Kobashi when he eventually, you know, takes over the ace position or shares the ace position with Misawa. So Kawada is like, for me, is like my favorite of the four pillars. I think has the most interesting story, though I would argue he's very high up there for my ranking of my favorite wrestler, but like maybe Keno Kobashi, I just think is a more complete like babyface, and I always tend to like babyface wrestlers a bit more than heel wrestlers. So I think Keno Kobashi just edges out Kawada's in terms of my ranking for like my favorite wrestler. But you know, I think all your numbers and dates are correct, Brandon. I would trust your memory, you know, especially, you know, since you deal with numbers a lot more than mine, even though like this is trying to make this my thing, talking about this era. But let's talk a bit about the Holy Demon Army. So this is their they've won the Real World Tag League twice. And the match we're going to talk about is the first time they've won it. They will then go on to win it one more time in 1997. So even though they've been like the most dominant tag team and are considered the greatest tag team in the history of All Japan Pro Wrestling, they've only won the Real World Tag League twice because they, like you're saying, the story for them is to be foils to Misawa. So like the previous times that they've reached the finals, they've lost to the team of Misawa and Kobashi. So going into this particular tournament, in this particular match, this is a really big deal. I think especially for Kawada, but also for Taue as a team to like finally vanquish whoever Misawa is teaming with at this time. And it's the up and comer, like kind of like the hot prospect, what do they call it? A blue chipper in Jun Akiyama here. Yeah.
It's come to think of it, it's the same combination from the 92 World Tag League final, right? Where Akiyama is filling in for Jumbo. You familiar with that match it's the 92? It's not, they're not doing finals yet, but it's the deciding match, right?
I can't remember that one. I'm sure I'll get to it eventually on this show.
Yeah, it's what is it? It's Akiyama and Taue. Yeah, Akiyama and Taue against Misawa and Kawada. That's right. But yeah, it's this is the beginning of Akiyama really getting elevated, right? I don't think he's had a Triple Crown match up to this point, but he's being introduced as Misawa's partner. And there's a lot of something I always think about when Akiyama and Kawada are when I watch them back in tag matches or whatever, is that they never really had a really big one-on-one singles match. I'm sure they had a number of matches as a result of being in the Champion Carnival at the same time, but there was never a really big marquee Akiyama Kawada match, and that's unfortunate because I think that's I think that would have been a really good big match for the Triple Crown or whatever.
I think that probably would have come in 2000, 2001 if the Noah split never happened. But yeah, Akiyama definitely has marquee matches with Misawa and with Kobashi while they're still all in All Japan Pro Wrestling, but not with Kawada. He does have some singles matches with him. I would argue that maybe he might have had a bigger, higher profile match with Taue than he would have had with Kawada during their time in Noah together. But in this, let's talk a bit about the tournament itself. So I want to talk about these participating teams. Let me go through the list and let me get your impression about some of these pairings here. So, of course, we have Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Taue, Jun Akiyama and Mitsuharu Misawa. Kenta Kobashi is aligned with the Patriot Del Wilkes, and I think they're still calling themselves the GET, Global, Energetic, and Tough. Johnny Ace is seemingly gone from this trio. He's now joined forces with Dr. Death, Steve Williams, and their team in this tournament. Stan Hansen has taken a young Takao Omori as his tag team partner. Giant Kimala, not Kamala, Kimala, and Jun Izumida who's also kind of pinned up similar to how Kimala does his body paint, their team, and they're kind of like the guys who are going to eat most of the pins. So they do have one major upside, I think, over Misawa and Akiyama in this tournament. And then the very, really oddball team of one Gary Albright and Sabu.
Yes. Did you watch the highlights? The YouTube link? There's a few YouTube links for this match out there, but at least a couple of them they're probably like the All Japan Classics airing that was aired many years after the fact, and it shows like a sort of a highlight reel of the tournament. Did you see that?
Yeah, I love those things. There's one for the 89 one tag league that I love. Yeah. It's just like the teams that you see in there, and the highlights of those matches are amazing. But this one's really fun. Just if you're a fan of Sabu from his days in ECW, yes, watching him integrate himself, or try to at least, in All Japan Pro Wrestling is quite a sight. And it's no wonder maybe he doesn't have that much success in Japan, because I think he burns pretty much every bridge he comes across in Japan.
Yeah, that sounds like Sabu. I don't know. I wonder, is this one of the times where he's on the outs with Heyman for ECW or something? So he goes on a tour of All Japan. I don't know, but I'm sure he had done a few tours with All Japan up to this point. But Sabu is definitely the one that stands out the most in this highlight reel. Where even in this highlight reel, they show, there's a number of matches that they had to make a lot of decisions about what to show and which matches to show. But I forget who their opponents are, Albright and Sabu. But Sabu is going to do the triple jump moonsault, which is usually he jumps onto a chair, onto the top rope, does the moonsault back into the ring. And rather than a chair, he uses Gary Albright's back to jump up to the top rope. And as he's attempting to do this, jump off the back of Gary Albright to the top rope, he just slips and falls. This is shown on the highlights. He gets right back up, of course, repeats the spot and executes it fine. And I just thought it was amusing that, even in this All Japan Classics highlight reel, they chose to show a Sabu botch, showing him just repeating the spot.
Oh, it's a classic. That's classic, though. That's a classic in its own right. Sabu botching a triple jump assault. But
and there's all these other random highlights of him just sort of randomly flinging himself, slingshot, flip into the ring, and just all sorts of very Sabu highlights in this highlight reel.
Yeah. So let's go to some notes. I took these from Dave Meltzer from the Wrestling Observer, December 16th, 1996 issue. And we're just going to talk about kind of the way the tournament played itself out in terms of getting to the final. So the tournament came down to the December 4th show in Niigata with Kobashi and the Patriot in first place with 60 points. This is like a big surprise. No one thought that they were going to reach the side, Brandon. They needed 2 points for a win and 1 for a draw, and they would have gone through into the finals. Misawa and Akiyama and Kawada and Taue each had 15 points, so they're tied. And while Steve Williams and Johnny Ace had 14 points. So the way the math works is Williams and Ace weren't entirely eliminated going into the final night, at least not math-wise. And although we've taken a combination of a victory by them and either losses or draws by either Misawa and Akiyama or the Holy Demon Army on the final night to put them in a 2 to 4-way tie going into the championship night on December 6th here. But that didn't happen, obviously. The booking follows a largely predictable All Japan pattern of having these kinds of point systems of people like, maybe the surprising team of Patriot and Kobashi getting to number 1, but there's a lot of drama going into who's going to be the final 2 teams going into December 6th here.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the Observer, and this is not the match of the year for the Observer in 96. Surprisingly, do you know what it is?
I don't remember now.
I think it's the June 7th, 1996 match between Misawa Akiyama and Asen Williams, which is an incredible match. But I think it's just a matter of the Observer calendar. I guess he has stopped doing this in the last few years, but the Observer calendar being a December of the previous year through November of the current year calendar. But this seems like a match that is the consensus pick for the best match of 1996 among people who are watching wrestling from all over the world in hindsight.
I can't remember the one that Dave picked for his match of the year for 96. I would assume that if I'm collating all the matches I've watched in 1996 at the time of this might have been probably right up there for me, if not the ultimate winner for match of the year. But continue with sorry.
I think it's just a victim of you can't vote for stuff that just happened because he's trying to make leeway for tape traders at the time who are getting stuff on a several month delay. So you don't want to vote in January for things that have happened in December because you probably haven't gotten the tape yet. So I think that's just what happened there. And I do believe the June Asen Williams Misawa Akiyama match is the match of the year for the Observer.
So back to the booking here. So Misawa and Akiyama, who suffered the biggest upset loss, perhaps in company history, according to Dave. They lost to the aforementioned Giant Kimura and Jun Izumida early in the tour, with Izumida pinning Akiyama. Oh boy! But they got their win back when Akiyama pinned Izumida in revenge in 11 minutes and 43 seconds before 2,650 fans in Niigata, and they clinched their shot. Their spot in the finals. Kawada and Taue beat Sabu and Gary Albright in 13 minutes, 29 seconds when Kawada pinned Sabu to end up clinching a spot in the finals as well. Going into the main event, Kobashi and Patriot only needed a 30-minute draw with Williams and Ace to make it a 3-way at Budokan 2 nights later. Since Kobashi and Patriot, a team figured to finish no higher than 4th place going in, had basically led the tournament standings the entire tour. In a surprise, it made sense that leading most of the way and nearly making the finals would be considered a success for them. So teasing the draw most of the way, the match ended when Ace proved to be the spoiler, pinning Patriot in 28 minutes and 14 seconds, leaving both teams in a tie for 3rd place in the tournament standing. So all that comes from the wonderful and talented Dave Meltzer, the greatest historian of professional wrestling. Go check out the Wrestling Observer. Get a subscription to that if you want to learn about your history about professional wrestling for sure. So going into the end of the tournament, the final standings are at first place, Kawada and Taue. They have 19 points. Misawa and Akiyama have 17 points. Williams and Ace and Kobashi and Patriot are tied for 3rd place with 16 points. And everyone else have 6 points. So there you go. And so this brings us to the date, Brandon. It's December 6th, 1996. The location is Budokan Hall in Tokyo. Mm-hmm. I've been in this building. It is.
I was going to ask you. Yeah, you've been to Budokan?
I've been to Budokan for New Japan, and it is the probably next to Korakuen Hall is probably my favorite place to go watch wrestling. It's an amazing building, and it's way better than the Sumo Hall, which I do enjoy. Just don't go there in the summer, please. It's not worth it.
Is it because of the box seating at the Sumo Hall?
No, it's because the air conditioner doesn't work properly.
Okay.
In my opinion, like some people, I don't know what you're talking about. It was fine, WH. Okay. I lucked out, and I was there 2 nights in a row for the G1 finals in 2000. I think it was 2016. I almost died both nights because it was so hot in there. But anyways, I do recommend Budokan. It's a wonderful, wonderful building to watch wrestling because they have a great air conditioner. Like I'll just say that. But anyways, let's get to.
I'm very jealous. Like if I could have a time machine. If somebody gave me like the Back to the Future DeLorean and I could go back to one place in time, it might be the Budokan somewhere in the mid or early 90s to just see what the atmosphere was like in person. So I'm just such a fan of that, the opening shot that you'd get on a lot of the commercial tapes or maybe the TV shows of the Japanese flag there in the ceiling, and then they would pan down to the ring and the crowd is just ready to boil over, and then the music starts and as we'll talk about, these guys just, there's no entrance set. They just walk out of the back down the aisle with, the younger wrestlers shoving everybody out of the way. It's just classic to my memory.
It is. And the fans are like the wrestlers, the seconds have to shove people out of the way because these fans are super rapid. They just want to get a touch of like, Misawa, Kawada, Kobashi, Taue, and whoever else. I mean, they even want to touch Stan Hansen, which is a bad idea because he's just given free reign to like whip his like cowbell and rope at people. And like I do think he's hurt fans because and he's never been punished for it. So there you go.
You noticed too in the Budokan in the earlier years, so like the Jumbo Misawa Classic matches in '90. The ceiling there's like colorful lights going on. That goes away in the mid 90s, certainly by this match. There's no more colored lights. And I wonder if that just like a creative decision by Baba to be like as bare bones and conservative as possible with his presentation. Or I wonder if that was just a cost cutting thing or what, but they were doing great business at the time probably. Right. So
I would imagine that was something that Budokan decided to renovate the building. And then maybe they just got rid of those lights because they were too old or something like that. That might have simply, and Baba would have no choice about what, Budokan decides to do with their own building because he doesn't own it, obviously. He's just renting it from them for multiple times during, his time as a promoter for All Japan Pro Wrestling. But let's talk about the undercard first. I just want to kind of go through it really quickly, the results of this show. In the opener, Kentaro Shiga and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi defeat Satoru Asako and Yoshinobu Kanemaru, and a name we hear in 2021 in a 6-man tag team match. It's one of the comedy matches with all the older guys in the match. Very, staple of All Japan Pro Wrestling. Haruka Aigen, Masanobu Fuchi, and Mighty Inoue defeat Giant Baba, Mitsuo Momota, and Rusher Kimura. Giant Kimala and Sabu, two different people who weren't teaming in the tournament, team up to take on Manuka, Mossman, and Yoshinari Ogawa. They defeat them. A 6-man tag team match, Jumbo Tsuruta, Stan Hansen, and Takao Omori take on and defeat Jun Izumida, Masao Inoue, and Damon Honda. 6-man tag team match, Gary Albright, Ken Kobashi, and the Patriot defeat Johnny Ace, Johnny Smith, and Steve Williams. I kind of want to see that match. That sounds like it has potential to be a really great match.
27 minutes long. Do you see that? I'm looking at ProWrestlingHistory.com. They have a 27-minute timestamp for that.
Yeah, I mean, just the idea of like Gary Albright like throwing around Steve Williams and Johnny Ace sounds like amazing. Plus, he's teaming with Kenta Kobashi. Sounds great. And then, of course, our main event is the match we're going to talk about. It's Akira Taue, Toshiaki Kawada, the Holy Demon Army, and they're taking on the Super Generation Army of Mitsuharu Misawa and Jun Akiyama. So, like you're saying before, Brandon, this is the video that we're going to link to in the show description from YouTube. It starts off with a recap of all the key matches in the tournament, and an important detail, like you talked about him, but I had in my notes. An important detail I found from watching these highlights was that Sabu really sucked in the tournament because he's botching moves all left, right, and center. He's trying to get all his shit in, but you can probably tell that probably the All Japan roster, the native wrestlers, and probably the foreign wrestlers as well, probably just like, who the fuck is this guy? Why is he doing all this shit?
Yeah, Sabu is definitely a product of his time in terms of him becoming the level of star that he was. I think if Sabu came along today doing the things that he does today, at least in terms of his style, he would just be sort of criticized as this indie guy who doesn't know what he's doing. And I'm sure he was to an extent in his prime during his time too, but he really stood out doing whatever it was that he was doing. He was one of the few, if not the only ones, willing to do the crazy kind of moves that he would.
I mean, he stood up because he was really the only one doing this stuff. And then it leads into I suppose with Van Damme eventually joining him in ECW. And it's oh, this guy's crazy too.
Yeah.
So we open with each team coming out, and we see in the Holy Demon Army's corner is Masao Inoue. He's their second. In Akiyama Masao's corner is Satoru Asako, and our referee is the great Kyo Wada. And at this time in 1996, he is probably the best wrestler in the entirety of professional wrestling.
He gets the Kohei chant, right?
Yeah.
That I've noticed, that's something that starts around 95 or so. Because you watch the classics from 94 or something like that, and I'm having watched everything out of order, having only gotten to this stuff after the 90s were basically over. It's noticeable that that starts in the later 90s, and I'm looking at some matches from 94 93, sort of waiting for the Kyohei chant, and it doesn't happen, but it does happen here.
I think by this time he's kind of supplanted Joe Higuchi as the main ref of, especially for the main events.
Yeah, I think he's doing all the big main events by the early 90s, I think.
Yeah, I think it's between him and while Jumbo's still on top, I think it's between him and Higuchi, and then eventually because of Higuchi's age, Kyo Wada eventually takes over, and I think the fans really recognize that. Wow, he's really good at his job. So he unfortunately in the last 4 years, I think he's kind of become a sad character of himself, and I really hope he retires soon, because I kind of want him to keep his legacy as one of the greatest refs of all time. But he's kind of, for me at least, he's kind of ruining it with his recent performances. But so you know what, I kind of was paying attention to the commentary team here, and the announcer on the commentary goes through the nicknames of each participant. And some of these are familiar, Brandon. Of course, we have Kawada. He's Dangerous K. Taue is Dynamic T, but this is the first time I've heard the nicknames of Misawa and Akiyama, and so Misawa's nickname is Historic M. Mm-hmm. And okay, I've never heard that until now. And then Akiyama was referred to as Glowing A. Now, what are your thoughts on these nicknames here?
I don't know. I know Akiyama's nickname more to be Blue Thunder. I mean, obviously, that's from the Blue Thunder Driver. And I don't know, does Misawa have any nickname other
nothing that's stuck. I don't think either of these, I think maybe this announcer was trying to be funny and
Is this Akira Fukuzawa, or is this somebody else by this time?
I can't remember who
it's definitely Baba on the...
He's the color, yeah. I don't think these two nicknames, never caught on. Obviously, most people, like you say, because of his tights and his move, Akiyama was known as the Blue Thunder. Misawa never had any kind of nickname associated with his emerald tights or anything like that, or anything else. He's just Misawa, so, but obviously we hear Dangerous K, Dynamic T. These are kind of ingrained in fans' minds as being the nicknames of Kawada and Taue respectively.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever heard that, maybe I dreamt this up, but that Misawa's tights, obviously he only starts wearing this just after he goes single and throws the mask away. Actually, he has some plainer green tights at first, right? But then he gets this white, rectangle on his thigh afterwards. I've heard once that it was symbolic of passing the torch on to the next generation or something like that. Have you ever heard that there's some sort of, because it does look like it is some sort of deliberate design, but it's not clear what it is, So
he goes from his Tiger Mask 2 gear, and then he gets rid of the mask, obviously, in the famous match. And then his first iteration of the silver and green is it's primarily green tights, and then he has the silver patch around his thigh and crotch area. Mm-hmm. And then it shifts into kind of a piping around his legs. That most people are familiar with. I'm not sure why he changes it. I think it coincides with also Kawada. He also changes his gear. He goes from blue and yellow when in the early 90s when the Super Generation Army is first formed to eventually he migrates into the black and yellow that we're all familiar with. The only people who really never changed are like Taue and Kobashi. I think Kobashi just moves more from a red hue of his tights to an orange hue. So, right. But other than that, like, Misawa and Kawada, like, really do a lot of gear changing from the time they debut to like the time to 1996, where we're familiar with like what they're wearing, and basically they wear the same thing until they, Misawa's unfortunate death and like Kawada's retirement.
Yeah, I love the colors. I was an active fan in real time when the Noah split was just happening, and it was almost like, oh my god, Kobashi's wearing black, Akiyama's wearing white. It was like, oh no, this changes everything I know.
I know, it's like such a jarring thing. And then Akiyama like dyed his hair, and then he finally shaved his head because he had that very glaring bald spot. And same thing like that Muto did.
Kobashi dyed his hair. He dyed when he was coming back from like the knee injury. There was like a photo of him with blonde hair, but he never he dyed it back. I think by the time he came back for that Budokan match in 2002.
Yeah, he did. It didn't last the blonde hair. Thank God. I think I could have handled the extended period of blonde Kenta Kobashi. Into the match now. So like basically Akiyama and Kawada, they start off. There's a Kawada call right away from the fans. Like they're really into like Kawada's story. I think like you and we were talking about like how we're fascinated by Kawada and his relationship with Misawa. I think the fans are too, and they want to see Kawada get this win, because like also I think they're obviously following the match series between these two teams, and like they know like geez, like they're 0-3 against Misawa and Akiyama already, like so I think they're ready for Holy Demon Army to like, just make a comeback here in this finals. There's a hot start right away with both men trading advantages early on, and until a good old kick from Kawada right to Jun Akiyama's face sends Akiyama to the mat. Akiyama recovers and starts laying in forearms to Kawada's face. He goes for his jumping knee, but Kawada avoids this and hits another kick to the face. But Akiyama has braced himself for that and hits Kawada with another forearm and a jumping knee that connects this time. And at this point, Akiyama decides to tag in Misawa, and the crowd in Budokan just goes electric that we're not going to see Misawa versus Akiyama here. Misawa versus Kawada here, Brandon.
Right. And I think there's just a little bit of a tease here, right? And this is where Misawa, I think, even hits the Tiger Driver on Kawada, which is what he used just about, I don't know, a little less than a month ago to pin Kawada earlier in the tag league, in their regular tag league match.
Yeah, he does hit Kawada with the driver, but this time Kawada does kick out at 2. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's happening even before that. Like, there's Misawa Akiyama hit a double drop kick that sends Kawada to the floor. Akiyama knocks Taue down with a drop kick as well. Then Misawa hits the elbow suicida for a big pop on Kawada on the outside. He sends Kawada back into the ring, and then does his trademark assault of elbows to the face, and then hits the aforementioned Tiger Driver. But I think at this point, like you can safely think that Kawada has braced himself. He's prepared himself. He's trained to get hit with that Tiger Driver. It's very rare that he gets pinned by the Tiger Driver at this point in their feud. I think like it would take something like the Emerald Flosion or the Tiger Driver 91. Like for him to get pinned by the Tiger Driver in the earlier match in the tournament, I think that's really surprising myself.
Yeah. In big matches, it's hard for me to think of a big match, especially a Budokan main event, where the Tiger Driver is the finish. It's a lot of elbows. It's the occasional Tiger Driver 91, but and Emerald Frozen, which I don't think Misawa has introduced at this point in 96. I think
not yet. That's much later. Yeah. Like at some point, like, both him and Kobashi decide, you know what, we need more dangerous looking finishers. So you have the Emerald Frozen and you have like the Burning Hammer introduced before they form Pro Wrestling Noah together. Taue saves Kawada from a second Tiger Driver, and Kawada does a cool looking takedown and immediately tags in Taue. It's kind of like a shoot fighting takedown here.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of Taue coming in to save the day and sort of do damage control for Kawada so that Kawada can get the revenge that he needs to get.
He does. Misawa floats out of a vertical suplex attempt from Taue, but Taue is able to catch him with a DDT and follows up with a jumping high kick to Misawa's face. I don't know about you. I like Taue has this kind of gangly like looking body, but my God, this man is super agile for a man his size and with his build.
Yeah, he's a lot of people on first watching are not impressed with Taue. I guess just because the body type. He's sort of a smaller version of Giant Baba. But if you stick with it, he's a good athlete. Obviously, he has a sumo background, I think. In addition to that, but it doesn't look that graceful. I think I know it's the enziguri that you're talking about, right? Where he just sort of floats up there with these long legs and he hits it. I almost feel like it looks really good and effective, but he also kind of looks ungraceful doing it. But there's some, I don't know, there's kind of like a grittiness to that I like.
I do think it's kind of like this awkward charm that Taue has in the moves he performs, including like he hits this massive powerbomb on Misawa with only for a 2 count. But I really love his power moves. He has the choke slam, the Nondoa Otoshi. He's going to try to do one to Misawa, who's perched on the top turnbuckle. But thankfully for Misawa, Akiyama prevents this from happening. And Misawa is able to drop a flying elbow to a prone Taue. And then he tags Akiyama in, who then goes to work with knees to Taue's face. But Taue counters with a beautiful sounding slap to the face. Like, it's amazing the way this mic is this ring is mic. You just hear this like that from Taue to Akiyama. And I love a good slap to the face. I don't know about you, Brandon, but I love watching one. I don't know if you like taking one.
It depends on how it's executed. If you hit me in the jaw, I will get sort of knocked out and staggered. But if you hit somebody above the jaw, it's I wouldn't say safe, but it's a lot better. At least nobody's gonna get knocked out that way.
No one wants to get like seriously injured, but I think a little slap to the cheek makes a good sound. It looks really good. So and that's what we got from Taue here. Akiyama is able to hit a dragon screw leg whip, but Kawada immediately comes in to halt Akiyama's momentum with a boot to the face. Kawada comes in with a legal tag and then spends the next several minutes committing legal assault on Akiyama with stiff chops and kicks his chest. It's just a series chop, kick, chop, kick. He hits this devastating brainbuster, but Akiyama, before he's able to pin him, Akiyama just rolls out of the ring. And, this is a great sequence part of the match where you just see the sharpness of Kawada's wrestling and especially his striking. And I really am a big fan of his brainbuster.
Yeah. This starts a long control spot on Akiyama. And just thinking about the structure without getting ahead on the match, but I just think about the structure that I notice when I watch these matches that I'm a big fan of, but I don't have a ton of experience doing the kind of structure, I guess, that they're doing. Typically the structure that we do in US wrestling is sort of what people refer to as the Southern style tag, right? Where there's maybe you start off with some shines for the baby faces. This leads to a cutoff of one of the baby faces and a long heat. And then there's a hot tag. Maybe if you're doing a long match, you do a second heat and you do another hot tag. And there's a different kind of structure in these All Japan tag matches in that they don't feel like they have to do a super hot tag every time. It's almost like, as I was taking notes and watching this, I almost feel like there's a warm tag where where somebody tags in and doesn't come in super hot and clean house on everybody, but somebody comes in and it's logical that they come in fresh and they start kicking ass for a while. But there's I don't know. There's a more subtle use of the tag here. And there's a lot of the illegal partner coming in to sort of guard what's happening, to sort of guard the ass kicking that his partner is administering on the legal man. Yeah.
I tend to find with Japanese tag team matches, a lot of the hot tags tend to happen mainly from when you have two people who have an issue or have a history with each other finally getting to the ring with one another. In this case would be Kawada and Misawa. That's the first hot tag, is when Akiyama finally tags in Misawa and Kawada's still legal in the ring. Then that's when this crowd comes alive. And that's kind of the pattern you see until I think more recently in New Japan tag matches, when you have obvious babyface heel dynamics, then that, in the Southern tag style comes more into play, the structure that you're talking about. But in All Japan Pro Wrestling in the 90s, I do think it's kind of there's heat and shine from both teams, because there's no real clear babyface heel. People will say, oh, they're, Kawada and Taue are heels. They wrestle more aggressively and have, certain beef with Misawa, so they really take pleasure in beating the shit out of him. But I never think of them as being heels necessarily, because like a lot of things that they do are things that Misawa and Akiyama or Misawa and Kobashi would do as a team themselves. So
yeah, Taue is maybe the nearest to heel in terms of what he does in the ring here in this match. Just like there's the snake eyes on the top rope and things like that, and there's the I don't know if you're probably going to mention it later, where he grinds his boot into I think it's Akiyama's, maybe it's Misawa. Anyway, it's one of their faces, and there's some heelish stuff that Taue does, but there's definitely nobody's a clear heel or face, which is kind of the norm for Japanese wrestling, right? And I sort of just wonder why Japanese wrestling emerged that way and U.S. wrestling emerged with like, you have to have a face, you have to have a heel. Especially in the 90s, at least, there's got to be one or the other. I think I don't know. It's one of the things that just drew me more to Japanese wrestling, into All Japan Pro Wrestling, is that, there was more subtlety to it. And it seemed, a bit more sophisticated in that, these are just stars wrestling and they have issues with each other, but we're not going to make it clear cut to you that you're supposed to hate one and love the other.
No, I think the main focus is like kind of this, like it's a real sports competition going on here, instead of like oh I hate you, and you stole my wife, I'm gonna beat the shit out of you now, kind of a thing, which is what kind of dominates American style wrestling. It's the kind of angles and stuff you have there. Back to the match though, like so here we have Kawada and Taue take turns beating the shit out of Akiyama, including like Taue just showing just really having awesome performance in this match. He hits a surprisingly nice looking savate kick, and then the enziguri that you mentioned before. He does a lot of these things where he's just jumping up. It looks awkward, but it's still super effective looking as well. Kawada tags back in and grabs the wrist of Akiyama and proceeds to chop him down. He maintains the wrist control, obviously inspiring Kazuchika Okada later on. Drags him back up and then chops him down again. And I wrote, Okada, eat your heart out. This is real wrist control. Kawada then assaults Akiyama while he's sitting down with a series of alternating chops to the chest and kicks to the back. I just thought, man, it really sucks to be Akiyama at this point.
Yeah, and this is just the beginning. It's a match that is just all about punishing Akiyama, but so they can get to Misawa.
Akiyama prevents a backdrop driver from Kawada, but then Kawada switches to a face lock, but Akiyama refuses to give up. This is one of the main stories of this match, like we're talking about here, Brandon. This refusal to give up from Akiyama. Like, he's just showing like he can hang with the Holy Demon Army, and it's just, this match is really, I feel, really designed to just get him in the eyes of the fans to a level where they see him as equal to like Kawada and Taue, and even eventually to Misawa.
Yeah, and he's had these. This is what their second or their third tag match, where so far up to this point, Misawa and Akiyama have won. But it feels to me like there's a not this guy too kind of reaction from Taue and Kawada, where they really have to give him a beating. And but it's like you said, though, for Akiyama to show what he can survive and how he's not willing to give up, and he keeps crawling back.
But Akiyama does survive, and he holds on, and he gets a hot tag to Misawa, and the crowd goes crazy when Misawa finally gets in there, and he hits a lot of his signature jumping clothesline moves and follows up with his face lock submission. But Taue comes in, like you're saying, Taue, he's there to just spoil everything for Misawa. He comes in to break it up, but Misawa sends him back out of the ring. But this gives Kawada the time to recover. Kawada and Misawa trade kicks, and then Kawada switches to Kawada kicks to Misawa's face. I just love when he does these things. And I got to think Kawada puts a little bit of extra stiffness, a little bit of extra stank on these when he sees Misawa's face, because Misawa, when he gets up, he looks pissed, and he proceeds to stiff Kawada in the face with his own elbows.
Yeah, it's when I watch these matches, and especially when I hear other people talk about these kinds of matches and how stiff they are, I do think the strikes look quite stiff, and we'll talk later about some of the suplexes that get thrown. But this is probably some pretty stiff strikes. I always say it's hard for me to tell just by looking at a match just how stiff something is, because the visuals that you see as a viewer of wrestling can can be misleading sometimes. You see stuff that happens that looks innocuous, and then you find out later, oh, that was really stiff. I almost died on that, But I have some confidence that these guys are hitting each other pretty hard.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting to think about. Like they obviously have some kind of unspoken agreement that we're gonna hit each other really hard, like harder than we would other people. But we're still working together. We're still doing a work. We're cooperating with one another to like have a good match. And so I always find that interesting when people work stiff, especially when that there's a real rivalry between the two people that are working together, and like there might be like animosity between them, but they're still professionals when it comes down to the nitty gritty of it, I suppose.
Yeah.
Taue comes in and grinds his boot into Misawa's face. This is the spot you're talking about.
Yeah.
Does this a couple of times, much to the displeasure, or maybe to some of the fans. But I think there are some fans who are quite enjoying him doing this. Misawa avoids a chokeslam off the apron and tags in a refreshed Akiyama, who hits Taue with a flying elbow as he runs off the apron to the floor. Akiyama strings together a series of nice moves, including an impressive Northern Light suplex on Taue. He gives Taue a taste of his own medicine by dropping him throat first across the top rope, to some mixed boos from the crowd. I guess they weren't expecting Akiyama to use like Taue tactics on Taue himself here.
Right. Yeah, it's just sort of Akiyama getting back at Taue for what he's done to him earlier. That is one of the moves that sort of, you pick him up at a body slam, you drop the throat on the top rope. That really gets a lot of heat in some of these early 90s tag matches, especially with Jumbo and whatnot.
It's now Misawa and Akiyama's turn to get the heat on Taue. You can hear a couple of loud female fans cheering on Taue. Who knew Taue was a heartthrob for the 90s pro scene here, Brandon? I was very surprised by the reaction here.
I didn't notice that, but I'm, he appeals to many audiences, I'm sure.
Yes, I'm sure many a magazine with his face on it was sold to many a female wrestling fan back in the 90s. Akiyama hits an exploder suplex, but Kawada immediately comes in before Akiyama can go for a pin. Kawada prevents a Misawa Tiger Driver on Taue with a clothesline, which lets Taue hit a brutal-looking German suplex, and he's able to tag in Kawada. So I guess this is one of the suplexes you were referring to.
We're talking about one of these suplexes. This is a German where Taue is doing this to Misawa, right? And he's throwing him at a pretty low angle. So it's not as if it's one of these big scooping German suplexes where you hoist him high in the air, but he's just pulling him back at a high angle. And Kawada does this, taking one, I think, from Misawa later, where like he flips backwards, like right on top of his head, which just looks very dangerous and like, I don't know, kind of unnecessary as far as taking care of your own safety. But it's moves like that make me wonder, oh wow, this must be where they contributed some damage to their necks possibly.
Oh, definitely. I gotta think that, well, as a wrestler yourself, if like someone said to you, can I hit you with this kind of looking suplex, I would imagine you're going to say, maybe we can do something different.
This move looks to me like it's all on the person taking the move, I think, in that I could, Misawa could have sort of sandbagged here and tucked his chin, but he didn't. He basically does a moonsault, right? And just lands on the top of his head. I think a lot of these suplexes, and whenever people have asked me about this, like, this is what I say, because I've taken my share of what people call head drop suplexes, and maybe it's different because I'm a relatively small wrestler, right? I'm not weighing as much as these guys weigh, so maybe it's different because there's just more weight in their bodies to take the bump on, and then maybe that makes it more risky for them. But if you land in such a way that you sort of do a back roll, it's can be quite safe. But if I'm dropped down at a certain angle where like I don't have the momentum to roll through this, then it can be really painful and dangerous and damage causing. But when they're done properly, I think they're pretty safe, despite how dangerous they look. I think it's just all about how you do it and how you execute it. Some of the stuff that looks super dangerous can be done safely if it's done correctly.
So I want to make a point at one of the main stories of the match that we talked about earlier was like this, Akiyama, surviving and elevating himself, being on the same level as Kawada and Taue. But I think the other story of this match is like how Holy Demon Army are kind of coalescing their teamwork, maybe more cohesively and in a much better way than they have in the previous 3 matches that they've had with Misawa and Akiyama, where like they're just, I think it just gives them an advantage over Misawa and Akiyama in this particular match, and who, they can't seem to like overcome the Holy Demon Army's teamwork here. Like another example of this is like Kawada hits a jumping knee drop, and Taue follows up with the top rope elbow drop right in like succession, right? And then I just thought, watching this, like another great example of their teamwork. Their timing is just beautiful. It's like they're reading each other's mind here. At one point, Misawa releases Kawada in a release German, and that has Kawada land right on his head as well. So it's kind of like the receipt that Misawa gives not to Taue but to Misawa, but to Kawada instead.
Are we talking about the Germans in succession here, or have you not gotten there yet?
No, I don't think we've gotten to the succession. Okay. This is like the release one. Like he just throws him up into the air, and then Kawada just lands right on his head.
Brutal.
There's a Tiger Driver pin attempt, which is broken up by Taue. Akiyama goes in, and Taue tries for the throat chop across the top rope again. But Akiyama is wise to this move. He blocks that, and then he and Misawa then proceed to coordinate strikes against Taue, including a stiff rolling elbow to Taue's face. So, like, I think that's maybe the receipt that Misawa is going to give to Taue for the earlier German on his head. At one point, Kawada is hit with Germans by both Misawa and Akiyama, and then he pops up, and then he staggers out of the ring, so there's no danger of him getting pinned while he recovers. I just made a note. Kawada's sell job and his facial expressions after these Germans was just next level, just amazing.
Yeah, I the last time I watched this was probably a couple of years ago, and I think I did like an Instagram story where I just recorded the screen of him, takes one German, then another German. Then he rolls right up, sort of like he's going to fire up into something else, but he just sort of staggers almost drunkenly and slips through the second rope down to the floor. It's just a classic sell. And I think it really highlights how Kawada, the subtlety of Kawada in how it works. When people watch Kawada for the first time, they often talk about how he's stoic and he doesn't express much. But what I think he does is he's very dynamic, or he's spending very wisely. He's very economical in his selling or facial expressions, so that when he does do them, when he does sell and does express, it means a ton. I think Shibata is like this in many ways too, in that they don't seem to spend much, but when they do spend, it means so much. And like that's just one of the reasons why I think Kawada is one of the best that there's ever been, or at least one of my favorites, in that he doesn't express much, but when he does, it's built up to really mean a lot, rather than, I think a lot of wrestling today, we've taught wrestlers, and we've been influenced by so much of the instruction about how you need to sell more, you need to sell really hard, which is well-intentioned and true in many ways. But I think it results also in a lot of overselling in the intent to put a lot of effort into your performance. But I think there's a lot of overselling rather than spending economically your expression so that it means so much when it does happen. And I think just Kawada is one of the best at that.
Oh, definitely. And to add to that, I think, like the deepness of his selling, like especially with his facial expressions, like you can read just so much into it, because like you're saying, he's very economical with it, but also I think he really understands, like, when he is going to sell, my God, he is going to sell like perfectly and masterfully. Continue on with the match. Misawa hits another Tiger Driver, but Kawada barely kicks out of this, but he does kick out of it, but you can tell like he's really on his last legs maybe here. Taue stops Misawa from hitting what looks like a half and half suplex. Akiyama goes to neutralize Taue.
Tiger Driver 85, right? That's Tiger Driver 85, I think.
The Tiger Suplex 85. Yeah,
Suplex, excuse me.
Tiger Suplex 85. It's a really dangerous looking move if you've never seen it. If you watch enough All Japan matches with Sawa in them, you're going to eventually see the Tiger Suplex 85 or 95 here. Taue stops. So Akiyama goes to neutralize Taue, but it's the other way around as he throws Akiyama knee first into the top rope and then hits the Nodoa Otoshi from the apron to the floor. Jesus. Akiyama hits the floor with a thud. I was just like, oh my God, he is dead.
Yeah. And starts this long story of just Akiyama laying on the floor while finally they have Misawa alone. But yeah, it's rare that Taue does this Nodoa from the apron to the floor. It happens in the 6'9" match as well. Maybe I'm sure it's happened in a handful of others too. But yes, it's Taue is taking everyone out when there's the Nodoa from the apron to the floor.
Definitely. Well, he proves it right after he goes back to the ring. He hits Misawa with this beautiful boot to the face. And I just wrote, Taue is so awesome. He goes over to put Kawada back in the ring. So, like, Kawada's still the legal guy. It's not Taue. So he goes to put Kawada back in the ring near his corner. So, Taue's the legal man. Kawada is on the floor, but he wants Kawada to get the pin, obviously. So he goes over, puts him on the apron, and then he goes over to the corner, and he tags him in. Wait, am I getting that right? Kawada is back in the ring near his corner, so he can tag in. I think so. Anyways, the tag psychology from these two, from Taue Kawada, is just off the charts in this match. Misawa reverses a powerbomb with a Hurricanrana and then a vicious elbow to the face and looks to tag out, but he doesn't realize that Taue has completely fucked up Akiyama with that choke slam to the floor. So he's like, where's my partner?
He gets up and walks towards his own corner for a second and realizes there's no one there.
So basically, Misawa is effectively in a handicap match, and Taue and Kawada realizes, and they're like, okay, now you're ours, Misawa. So Taue starts hitting Misawa with many of his signature moves and reverses Misawa's attempts at a comeback. At one point, Taue hits a fucking tope on Misawa.
Yes,
on the floor.
The Taue tope.
Beautiful. It's not graceful or anything, but it's still beautiful, Brendan?
No, it's not graceful. It's not perfectly executed with the finely tuned fundamentals, but it's effective. That's much of Taue's offense.
And on the floor, like, Taue is looking to like do the same thing to Misawa they did to Akiyama, but thankfully for Misawa, Akiyama has recovered. He saves Misawa from this choke slam attempt on the floor. Taue then tags in Kawada, who again smells blood in the water. He corners Misawa in the corner and proceeds to knee him mercilessly, as well as kick him in the face. This looks brutal, Brandon.
If I can get in, like the moment where Taue's trying to do the Nodoa on the apron to the floor to Misawa. He's already done it to Akiyama. Akiyama's been laying on the floor all this time. And this kind of similar things happen in the 6'9" match that has Kobashi in it. This is where Akiyama just gets up off the floor and staggers over and just hugs Misawa's ankle to prevent this. And there's this, I don't know, it happens a couple times in this match, and it happened a couple times in this 6'9" match where it's sort of like they're, trying to remove children who are, throwing a temper tantrum, where like, Taue has the Nodoa, he's grabbing the neck of Misawa, and he just sort of like, he realizes that Akiyama is holding on to their ankles, and he just sort of looks over Misawa's shoulder and yells to Kawada to come over here and get rid of this.
It's quite amazing to see. It just really adds to the flavor of this match. And not only are the fans impressed, and not only are we impressed, Brandon, the commentators in this match are all fired up by the sheer viciousness that's on display that's leveled against Misawa here. Like the amount of violence that this man is being subjected to. But you know what? He is Mitsuharu Misawa. He recovers and is about to mount his comeback, but Taue recognizes that this is going to happen and steps in to take some punishment to save Kawada. Beautiful, beautiful teamwork here. Kawada also eats some elbows, and it looks like Misawa is going to get the advantage on both, but Kawada ducks a rolling elbow and catches Misawa with this gross-looking back suplex that drops him on his head. Again, the teamwork on display from Taue Kawada is just absolutely amazing here.
I think this is the other German suplex that is just ridiculous. Low angle, but high landing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I was amazed, like obviously this is the kind of move that eventually does kill Misawa, like in Noah, but like, I mean, this guy took this move so many times, in his career. Like it's not surprising that like a move like this eventually, does kill him, unfortunately.
Yeah. I think Misawa's, obviously his death in the ring a number of years later, I think it has a lot to do with just not taking time off. Yes, this style that they were doing was very grueling and very brutal. I don't know. Again, I don't watch these matches and feel like I have a lot of confidence about how painful or damaging or dangerous a lot of the stuff was. Again, like I said, I feel that there's a lot of misleading visuals that we tend to conclude from watching matches and just from having performed in matches and having watched others perform in matches and then talking to them after, or hearing people think what they thought was dangerous in my match. I don't know what is dangerous and what is not without having felt it. But I think the big thing with Misawa is that he just never took time off, and he probably needed neck surgery or some sort of medical treatment, and that he just never, he wanted to stay, on the cards and continue to help Noah's business. So he never took time off.
Yeah. I mean, I do think with a lot of people in pro wrestling in Japan, especially, like, it's cumulative. It's not necessarily one particular move or one particular match that has done it. It's a, like with Kobashi, his whole body is like shot because of the cumulative damage he has done to it over like the last 20 years of like wrestling the way he did. But back to the match, Misawa survives a Kawada folding powerbomb. So Kawada decides, okay, like, I tried tagging Taue. Taue hits the dynamic bomb. And if you don't know what a dynamic bomb is, folks, it is basically a Liger bomb. So it's he gets him up for a power bomb, and then he just sits down with Misawa in a pinning combination. Thankfully for Misawa, Akiyama saves him from getting pinned by the dynamic bomb.
The dynamic bomb is what Dave Bautista is trying to do.
This is true. This is what he's trying to do. But I like Big Dave, but like Taue just kind of like outclasses Batista as far as this particular move goes, for sure. This brings in Kawada, and the Holy Demon Army proceed to murder Akiyama with a combination Nodo Otoshi backdrop driver suplex, high angle, very dangerous looking, and Akiyama looks like he's about dead here. This sends Akiyama rolling out of the ring and out of the rest of the match, basically. So now we're back to, like, they've isolated Misawa, and I gotta say here, Misawa's performance as the Never Say Die babyface is unbelievable at this point in the match. He not only survives some of the big bombs from Holy Demon Army, but he gives as good as he gets with his trademark elbow strikes to both Kawada and Taue here, Brandon.
Mm-hmm. Have we gotten, or is it still to come, the Akiyama back suplex alone? Just the back suplex? No, I think that's later. I see it in your notes later. Never mind. Yes.
Let's continue. We're going to get to that point. You can jump in there. Yeah. Misawa blocks a jumping gamiguri to his face, but Kawada hits a gorgeous capo kick to Misawa's head. It's just like, one thing I love is that Kawada is deceptively agile with his rolling kick moves and jumping moves.
For sure. Yeah, he starts to unload some of the moves that, the Kawada kicks that have been saved until this point in the match.
Akiyama stops Kawada from hitting the gamiguri with a spear, and because Kawada decides to punish Akiyama, because of this. But Akiyama continues to fight back and has his crowd buzzing. Like, they're really firmly behind Akiyama. Kawada hits a backdrop driver so hard that even though Akiyama lands on his head, he looks like he's having a heart attack. Is this the move you're talking about?
Yeah, I remember seeing this for the first time, and it just shocks me every time I see it. All right, what I was saying earlier about moves that I think, maybe they were dangerous, but you can't really tell. Like, this is one where it sure does look like he fucking kills him. Like, this is the one I think where Akiyama takes it, boom, doubles over, and just puts his hand over his chest, like, ugh. It just looks really tight and like a really hard and probably dangerous landing.
It's affected his heart. This move that he's actually like, clutching it almost like that.
I could see it like crushing your chest, like just like crushing your sternum the way that he lands.
From here, there's a gamiguri for Kawada, but it gets a 2 count. There's an awesome looking folding power bomb. Only a 2 count again. Like, I gotta say, like, Kawada, like, the power bombs in this company, especially from Kawada, I love the folding power bomb. I love the dynamic bomb. they're just so awesome. Like when we talk about power bombs, we talk about like people like Sid Vicious and Big Ben Vader and stuff like that. And they're great power bombs, definitely. But I gotta say, like I'd rather take a power bomb from either of those two than from Toshiaki Kawada, especially the folding one, because he just plants you there, right, really hard.
Yeah, I think any move where you don't bump or land on the ring with the person, so. In Kawada's case, where he's power bombing his opponent with his feet planted the entire time, can be really painful because you have a 200, however many pound person pressing their entire body weight down on. Every ring I've been in is a pad, wood, and metal, and the metal is usually kind of bowed, and that's what allows the wood to give for the bumps. But when you have somebody who's pressing their own body weight down on the surface, the wood gets pressed down into the bowed metal. And then, so there isn't as much give when you bump and hit the mat. So these could be really hard, non-giving bumps.
So if people can't tell, we're basically in the crescendo of this match. We're in like kind of the finishing stretch here. So Taue holds Akiyama back, and this leaves Akiyama open for one of Kawada's Gamagiri kicks, which sends him to the outside floor. Kawada goes for the folding powerbomb once more, and this time he hits it, Brandon, and he hits it for the 1, 2, 3. He pins Mitsuharu Misawa in 31 minutes. 37 seconds of this amazing epic tag match.
And in this closing stretch too, there's a lot of really good shots that are typical of the camera work of All Japan at the time. They're doing this sort of diagonal but elevated view. So I'm not talking about the bird's eye view, which happens sometimes in this era, but this sort of diagonal looking up from the rafters view, looking at sort of from the angle of one of the posts. And there's a good, a great shot of the powerbomb happening and Akiyama just sort of reaching across the ring. He's not going to make it, and Taue is there anyway, but just reaching out. It's just this great, photographic shot of a near fall. And there's a lot of good moments too that you see from that camera angle where Akiyama has just been drilled with something and he's just sort of dying near the bottom rope, or like his head is on the bottom rope and slipping down and hitting the canvas, just tragically collapsing.
I mean, like you're talking about the scene that's on display here. Like, so we have Kawada and Taue, they've won their first real world tag league, and it happened because Kawada vanquished his greatest rival Misawa and he pinned him, and like they're celebrating. They look like, yeah, we're the winners, while Misawa and Akiyama look like they're going to be going to the hospital afterwards. Yeah. So
there's great close-ups of Akiyama with just this vacant look in his eyes, like he doesn't know where he is, like he might not even be alive, and the younger wrestlers are putting ice packs under his neck and stuff.
So Brandon, I was able to get a translation of the post-match interview. If you and the listeners would like to hear what was said. So in the post-match interview, Taue is asked from the interviewer, first, what are your feelings about this match? And Taue says, thank you very much. And then Kawada is asked, how do you feel? Kawada's, yeah, I became the winner. Thank you. And at some point, they're both asked, how do you feel now that the winner has been cited in this tournament? And then they both say, yeah, it's great, thanks. Then Taue asked how he feels about them winning the various other matches in the tag league, and that they had the strongest tag team. Taue says, yeah, thanks. That's because of everyone. Thank you very much. And then Kawada, how do you feel about getting the 3 count of Misawa? And then Kawada's like, yeah, it's great. Thank you. And they're just saying thank you a lot. So not the most compelling promos in the history of wrestling, but my God, the matches are amazing.
So I just watched this. I watched the post-match too. And whatever Taue is saying is getting laughs. It's sort of like he's saying something endearing, or sort of, I don't know. He's getting laughs for whatever he's saying. So maybe it's just something about the timing of what he's saying.
Maybe just his thank yous are rather humorous. It's with Taue, it's either like he's saying something really dryly, I suppose, or he's saying something really dirty because he's apparently a very dirty-minded man, like Misawa. Surprisingly, people are surprised at like what a pervert actually Misawa is, and so is Taue, apparently, according to some of the foreigners who've gone on tour with these gentlemen. But that's the match. I don't know about you, Brandon. I went 5 stars. I do the 5-star rating system. I went 5 stars for this match.
Yeah, my star rating system has not been calibrated lately, but when I did give out stars, I thought this was, a 5-star, one of the all-time great matches. I really liked you at the end. Just sort of some of the atmosphere that they're probably not even intentionally doing. Just you have all these middle-aged men in suits getting in the ring, and the big check gets handed out, and it just all looks very sports-like, and it aids me as a viewer in my suspension of disbelief and believing that this is a real sporting event. This is something that everyone is taking very seriously, and the wins and losses matter a lot. Just a lot of little things like that make things seem very serious and sports-like.
I think if like there's an American promotion that not emulated necessarily the style, but the presentation of Japanese wrestling, like with things like this, I think you can really set yourself apart in the landscape. But, I think most people take away like, oh, we got to drop each other on our heads and we got to do like 15 flips, like a Japanese promotion would, instead of like, oh no, like, if you present it as a sport and like with real, consequences for the matches and like make it seem like it's realistic and the wins and losses do matter, I think you could set yourself apart. I think that's where like Ring of Honor, kind of thought they were like copying All Japan of the 90s, but not necessarily like the style, yes, but not the presentation necessarily.
Right. I think about this a lot, and I feel kind of guilty sometimes talking about it because it also happens to be, the style of my favorite promotion of all time in All Japan in the 90s. So I wonder if it's just me projecting, I want wrestling to be the way that my favorite wrestling is like, or would it really work from a business standpoint? But I think maybe I'm certainly inclined to think so. I think the U.S. wrestling tradition is very different, and I think wrestling, and not just wrestling, but sort of creativity in general, just tends to be very derivative of what you've seen before. And the vast majority of the watch time of wrestling that anybody has seen for the last few decades, at least, has been a very different presentation of wrestling that, among other things, wants to present itself as sort of in on itself or not taking itself too seriously. So you don't, so you're not as able to make fun of it because it's fake wrestling. So I just think there's a ton of tradition and groupthink to overcome, and even being able to do that to test whether or not it would be a good economic approach to presenting wrestling. I think you could, like you said, I think there have been some approaches like this. There's been some Ring of Honor has tried this. I wrote an article a few months ago about how I don't think anybody is really doing a mainstream approach to wrestling that would actually capture the widest audience. I think maybe this kind of presentation is something that does it. And like you said, it's not that I'm saying, do all these dangerous moves and have everybody stiff each other and drop each other on their heads, but just more so the presentation of being a sport and taking yourself in your pseudo sport very seriously and aiding the audience in their suspension of disbelief. I think that might work.
I believe it does, and it could, because you can have masked wrestlers. You can have people who come from a lucha background and have like outlandish costumes, but as long as they're wrestling in a realistic manner and present themselves and take themselves like realistically, I'm not going to say seriously, but more like realistically, instead of like being, a meme or like saying, hey, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, wrestling is fake, and I'm here to help you understand that. Like, that's not the kind of wrestling I like. And I think that the market's oversaturated with that style and the kind of people who do that kind of style of wrestling, which is fine in of itself. Like, you can do that. I'm not saying that should be banned or anything. But the kind of wrestling
there's an audience for that. There's an audience for a more, I don't know, what are examples of this in history? Like a more Chikara-like or Dragon Gate-like, storyline heavy, what I think people mean when they say storyline heavy kind of wrestling. I think the biggest audience to capture, though, might be in a more realistic approach. But I think we're just up against a vast tradition and preconception of what wrestling is, at least in the US or in the West, that, it's incredibly difficult for something like that to get executed. And there have been a number of repackagings and launchings of promotions, including AEW, I think, that have in some way or another promised a sports-like version of wrestling. But it's been quite a bit like WWE in my view. Not completely. I'm not saying AEW is exactly like WWE. It's not. It's quite different. But it's not. But it's nearer to WWE than it is to All Japan in the 90s.
I think even in Japan, there's the presentation that you see here, it doesn't exist anymore. There is a lot more kind of entertainment aspects in Japanese professional wrestling, a lot more than you would see back in the 90s. But that, that you take what you get and you make the most of it as a fan, I suppose. But let's close things up here. I just want to wrap it up with saying, Dave Meltzer also gave this a 5-star rating as well. The people over at Cage Match gave this a 9.64 out of 10 based on 74 votes. The Grapple average rating is a 4.71 based on 34 ratings from based on a 5-star scale rating. And I just want to say, this is one of the best Taue matches, performances I have ever seen, just because he plays his role so well, and his role is to ensure that his team wins. But I think also secondary to that, but just as important is he wants Kawada to pin Misawa. I think everything he does in this match leads towards that goal. He tries to pin Misawa himself as well, but whenever he can, he tries to he tags in Kawada. He gets Kawada and he makes sure Kawada does not take the brunt of a lot of Misawa's big power moves and pinning moves. And he's just masterful. I just think he shines a little bit more than Kawada, even though Kawada is the one who gets the pin on Misawa in this match, Brandon.
Yeah, it's a lot of times Taue is the most overlooked of the 4 or 5 pillars, but there are some really great performances from him in this match, and I think that in many ways this match is a sequel to the 6-9-95 match, where there's a lot of the same dynamics happening, where Taue is getting in there and doing damage control and setting up Kawada so that he can get in there and pin Misawa, and just to highlight how important just a pin in a tag match is. And it's not just that they won, but who pinned who is such a big deal. And in fact, I think this is only the second time, the first time being 6-9-95, but this is only the second time I think that Kawada has pinned Misawa.
I believe so. I think you're correct on that. I don't have it in my notes here, but yeah, it's significant. Anytime that Misawa, Kawada got any kind of a win, whether it's singles or 6-man or a straight up tag, it's significant. Because I also anyone who got a pin on Misawa, it was so rare. And because he's the ace of the company, it elevates you. The thing with Kawada is it elevates him, but it doesn't, because we talked about in the Kawada bio show, he's openly questioning Giant Baba's isolationist policies for All Japan, because he sees all the business New Japan is doing with working with other promotions. He's like, why don't we get in on that? And he says this publicly. So he's in the doghouse with Baba, which is never a good place to be. He also has, the unfortunate, I think it's true. The Tom Zink story you mentioned before, Kawada realizes I'm not as good looking as Misawa. I'm not as marquee value as Misawa is. He's also he has to contend with Kobashi, as well, because it's so obvious, Kobashi is the one that's going to jump ahead of Kawada in the pecking order, even though Kawada has seniority over him in the company. And, the senpai kohai seniority level kind of hierarchy that exists in Japan is very important in Japanese professional wrestling, especially in All Japan. But, Kobashi's going to, bypass that, because business is business, and he's more marketable than Kawada is in the eyes of Baba, at least.
And one thing that I've always wondered about, and I don't really know, and maybe you touched on this in the Kawada episode that came out recently, but so is that core of the heat on Kawada, is that he openly criticized Baba or All Japan for not doing more interpromotional stuff? Like, is there what leads to such bad feelings between Misawa and Kawada? Like, what really are the politics between those two that results in, when Misawa starts Noah, that Kawada, Fuchi, and Kyohei Wada are the only ones who are left behind. It's sort of ironic that, Misawa is, sort of, basically the son, the adopted son of Giant Baba, but Kawada ends up being the one who says, no, I'm not going to leave, I'm not going to leave Mrs. Baba, at least in 2000.
I think it was less loyalty to Mrs. Baba and more like you're saying, Brandon, like there's the heat between Misawa and Kawada. They just hated each other by the end. Like they could work together because they're both professionals, but like personally, they didn't get along. There's a lot of times where, Kawada or Misawa would take liberties with one or the other, and then it would piss one or the other off, like in the match, and they just stiff each other. Like they're still cooperating, but they're like, okay, well, you hit me really hard unnecessarily. Well, I'm going to hit you right back. And this is like the story of the relationship. The reason he doesn't go, because he knows he's going to be third fiddle in the company. Yeah. And with everyone gone except for him and Fuchi, it's like, well, now I'm going to be the top guy, even though it's a depleted roster. It's a shell of its former self. I'm still going to be the top guy in this company. And I'm sure there's a genuine thought in Kawada's head that he can rebuild the company by bringing in other people into the company and maybe trying to get, people from other companies to join him in the new All Japan that he's going to forge. Who knows? With Fuchi, I think he stays out of loyalty to the memory of Baba. And Kyohei Wada, I believe Baba gave him ownership of the ring trucks or something like that. So he has a business investment to stay with All Japan.
Okay. Yeah, I guess if you're Kawada and Misawa's going off to start his own thing, you may have such bad feelings between yourself and Kawada or yourself and Misawa that I'm not going to go work for him where he's undeniably the boss and he probably doesn't want me over there anyway. So yeah, it's Misawa never wrote a book, right? But Kawada did.
Yes.
Yeah, I wonder if there's any detail in there about their relationship.
If you listen to the Misawa episode that I did with Hisami, who does the Noah translations over on Twitter, like you can hear a lot of like her talk about the relationship that Kawada and Misawa had, and it was very, very contentious and very, very heated inside the ring and behind the scenes as well. Like, I mean, Misawa was going to be the president of the company; he's going to be the head booker, and I'm sure Kawada knew, like, oh, I'm fucked. I'm going to be top tag team wrestler, and I'm going to get Triple Crown shots, and I'm going to lose a lot of them to both Misawa and to Kawada. And he probably realized, like, oh, I'm going to get passed over by Akiyama in this company as well. So, like I think for him, he decided I'm going to stick with All Japan. And I think he realized like the interpromotional stuff that he wanted to do with All Japan was going to finally happen with Misawa gone and Mrs. Baba, with Baba gone as well. And like he got to do like some great business with New Japan Pro Wrestling and having these dream matches with Kensuke Sasaki and right. Tag team matches with him and Fuchi against, Tenzan Kojima and Nagata Izuka that people should go watch and stuff like that. But like this Kawada is just, he's great in this match. Taue's freaking amazing in this match, but I don't want to shortchange both Akiyama and Misawa. They play their roles amazingly, especially Akiyama in this match. And I urge people to go check it out. And Brandon, I want to take the time. Thank you so much for joining me on this show and picking this match. I had an awesome time watching it twice and taking notes and talking about it with you here.
For sure. Thank you for having me, WH. It's one of my favorite matches of all time. And when you asked me to do this, it was wow, like there's so many good matches to pick from, and this is like I said, it's one of my favorite matches of all time. So it's great to revisit this stuff, especially with somebody who knows so much about the history and the background.
I hope like people who are fans of your Wrestlenomics show and hearing you talk about the business side of wrestling, I hope they get to hear this show and hear you just talk straight about wrestling, about like a match and give your analysis about just the wrestling style that was on display here. I thought very illuminating for me as well. So where can more people find your work, Brandon?
Yeah, it reminds me. I did something similar with John Carroll months ago about the 6'9" 95 match. But yeah, you can find. I do a podcast weekly that I have to record right now. Wrestlenomics. That's on whatever podcast app you have. You can find it by searching for Wrestlenomics. There's Wrestlenomics.com, which has my written work on it. You can support the Patreon at patreon.com/Wrestlenomics, and you can follow Wrestlenomics on Twitter at Wrestlenomics. You can follow me on Twitter at Brandon Thurston.
Awesome. And you can follow me on Twitter at WHPark9, the letter 9, and the number 9. Sorry, why am I saying a letter? Also, we're going to have a sale at the Post Wrestling merchandise store for the Post Perez t-shirt. Go there, check out the details. I forget the exact percentage we're having, but we're having a sale on this shirt as you're listening to this. So go check that out over postwrestling.com and pick up a t-shirt for Post Perez. If you like this show, that t-shirt is obviously related to this show because I host both shows. So yeah, support the show that way. And thank you to Brandon. Thank you to all the listeners for all the positive feedback. Especially, I got so much positive feedback with the Kawada bio that Dylan Fox joined me on with, and kudos to Dylan for doing that show with me and just bringing so much information with him. But yeah, definitely, Brandon, I will definitely invite you back on to talk about another match down the line on the long and winding Royal Road. I really enjoyed having you here. And until next time, I want to say to all the listeners, thank you and goodbye.